It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I do want to talk about the first week of the new Congress. A lot of people are saying let the games begin, but the Washington Post and the New York Times today had several columns about what the Republicans are up to. What's your take?
I think what we saw last week is what we're going to see a lot of for the rest of the year. A lot of partisan wrangling in the House on the Republican side, with basically what I call the nutcase caucus holding the upper hand. But also, I think the Senate Republicans are probably going to want to moderate a little bit because they have a real chance of winning the Senate, and they don't want a result like 2022 to happen in 2024. So the contrast that I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday of the split screen with the speaker's fight and Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan holding Ford in the House, while Mitch McConnell was with President Biden in Kentucky at a bridge dedication. You might see more of that contrast over the year. Look, I think chaos is going to reign in the House. We now know that 11 of the 17 chairmen that McCarthy appointed are election deniers. Probably not a good start, including Judiciary, Ways and Means, Homeland Security, Armed Services, and most importantly, Rules. And McCarthy put 3 of the nutcase caucus members on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee of the House is a really important committee because it decides what bills and what amendments are considered on the floor. So if sort of the extremes in the House have their way, I'm sure they're going to put up a lot of amendments that they think will embarrass the Democrats, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so what's going to happen? You're going to see a lot of showcase hearings. I mean, we've already gone after Hunter Biden's laptop and Biden's brother and all that kind of thing. I'm not sure those are the top priorities of the American people, but maybe they are. You're going to see a lot of revenge against people who they don't like in the House. I think McCarthy's already said that they're going to take Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell off the Intelligence Committee. I guess this is revenge for Marjorie Taylor Greene, even though I think there's a little bit of difference between Adam Schiff and Marjorie Taylor Greene. We're going to see a lot of investigations and probably some impeachment proceedings against Biden officials. You'll see a lot of message showcase legislation. Last week we already got the first one, which was eliminating the increase in funding for IRS because somehow IRS agents are thugs who are going to come and attack ordinary people, except and what what they want, it would be to keep them from auditing their contributors. But nonetheless, it's just showcased because nothing's going to happen with it in the Senate. It's already passed. And but they send it for a political message. And the other thing that I mentioned before was they're going to probably create a lot of votes on issues, abortion, immigration, crime, that they think are going to embarrass the Democrats. And so we'll see a lot of those votes. Legislatively, I don't think much is going to pass, at least nothing that originates in the House. If there is going to be any legislation that's going to pass, it's likely going to be passed in the House by a coalition of Democrats and Republicans from the 18 districts, the swing districts that Biden won in the 2020 election. But a lot of that will depend, I think, on Mitch McConnell, because, in my day, when you actually did legislate, as opposed to having the leadership decide what was going to be the legislation, if the House sent over a bill that was nutcasey and you didn't want to do anything, you take the number in the Senate and you send back a bill that you wanted to actually get passed, and and then go to conference, and chances are you could get something decent out of that. Well, they haven't been doing that. That's sort of what they call regular order, and we'll see if McConnell might feel, in the interest of protecting Senate Republicans in 2024, that it's necessary to do that. I think politically, I think it's going to really be a problem for the Republicans. You know, I mentioned these votes. The problem with having votes that excite the right-wing base is that's all they do. And the Republican majority, which is 5 seats, is dependent on these 18 Republicans, and probably even more than that, who are in swing districts. And if it's going to embarrass the Democrats, it's probably going to embarrass the Republicans in the swing districts too. And it'll hurt them politically. So a lot of what they're going to probably wind up doing in what they think in the interest of their own politics is really going to undermine their ability to keep a majority in the House.
Thanks, Al. Craig, as Al said, it looks like the Senate will play the adult in the Congress. What's the point of all this from the House GOP perspective? Can you make out any kind of solid strategy?
Well, that is a very good question. First of all, I think all that Al said is correct. But there won't be that many consequences to what they try to do, because they won't be very successful, as Al points out, getting through the Senate, or certainly getting Biden to agree to something. I think the consequences they're going to face, and what we don't know is how they'll react to some of this. The consequences they'll face is what McCarthy will be unable to get through, that he has to get through, like debt ceiling legislation, passage of the budget, the issues that will keep the government operating. And whatever the size of the far right number is, 20 members, let's say, it's still a fraction, and it's a fraction within the Republican Party. So most of the nation is going to look to people who are now in leadership positions in the House to keep the government running, to get the debt ceiling raised. Things that if they don't do them have consequences. And, it's a funny thing when you can talk a good game, but when the national parks start shutting down, when air traffic control slows down, when payments aren't getting made, when people aren't working, people get very frustrated. And the Republicans in the House are not very skilled at governing yet. But what they are unable to do, or what they delay doing, it will have consequences for them in November. And that's what they have to pay attention to. Right here on the Eastern Shore, our fine representative, Congressman Andy Harris, has sort of had this free ride. He's been in the minority. He can say what he wants to say. He can take shots at anybody he wants to take shots at. He's now in the majority. He's going to be held accountable for voting or not voting to keep the government running, to raise the debt ceiling, to do things that actually will matter in people's lives. And so the rhetoric is going to fly all over the place. I don't really think people are going to learn much that they don't already know about these far right conservatives, but they will pay close attention to things that affect them every day. And I think they'll penalize those who they can hold accountable if things go off the rails. And I would say things are likely to go off the rails given this very narrow majority. I think the only other thing I would add is that I am sure in this equation somewhere is the question of how much difficulty can they cause President Biden in his effort to get reelected. And so the strategy among House Republicans will be to investigate, but it will be to put out an agenda that theoretically a Republican challenger could run on, and it'll make life more difficult for Biden, because I think their eye is eventually capturing the White House. But that's probably more strategic thinking than they're capable of at the moment.
Oh, Al, I do want to talk about the FAA. There was almost 9,000 flights canceled because of computer failures, and We've just gone through this remarkable meltdown with Southwest Airlines 2 weeks ago. You know, at the end of the day, the federal government has to keep the infrastructure going. Does this concern you?
Yes, it does concern me, probably a lot less than it would have concerned me 10 years ago when I was traveling 4 or 5 days a week. But yes, it's, America depends on air travel. And this has not been a very good 3 months for the airline industry and the airline system. Look, Craig is the expert on this, so I'll let him talk about it. But this is one of the things that affects people in their everyday lives. And, if you're spending Christmas in some airport because you can't get to where you want to go, and obviously weather is a big problem, but also because an airline system just basically went belly up. And now you have, it looks like one of the main systems that's necessary for all of the airlines to operate in the United States is not very functional and out of date. At some point, people are going to, I think the politicians will pay a price for that. It probably doesn't help the reputation of Pete Buttigieg as Secretary of Transportation, and might undermine his future plans a little bit. But basically, I think the administration and the Congress, if we don't get this airline situation straightened out in the next year or so, we're going to really start to pay a big price.
Greg, you are the expert in the room, so to speak. What's your take?
Well, I've flew airplanes for 50 years. I'm still a pilot. I'm not currently flying, but I never flew in the airlines and I never flew in the military. So I was out in the system as a general aviation pilot, and I'm very familiar with the NOTAM system. It used to be a little book we'd get with updates on runways and things like that. They'd issue it every couple of weeks before you took a flight. During your briefing with a briefer on the phone, you would ask if there are any NOTAMs that would affect your flight. Basically, you think of it as, pilots want to know everything they can possibly know about their route of flight and their destination before they take off. And this system provides that. It's fed by the airports and other sources. And over time, it's, putting out a booklet in paper every couple of weeks didn't make a lot of sense. And they began digitizing it and putting it online, and it all became more efficient. But we lost many of the people who were part of that program, and we tried to do everything digitally, from submitting the information from airports to feeding it back out to pilots and flight operations centers. Now, there are multiple means of getting information to assure a safe flight, and pilots use multiple means. So I don't ever think that anyone is endangered by this delay in getting the most current information on NOTAMs. The interesting thing is there is a regulation that says before each flight, a pilot will check NOTAMs. And the FAA is funny about that. When they put a requirement like that in place, they require you to do it. And if their system doesn't allow it, they then have to figure out, do they have to shut things down until they can fix it? There's a lot to be learned from this small issue, although it affected a lot of people's lives. First and foremost is what caused it. Corrupted files in 2 systems within the FAA, and then some other reason for a failure in Canada within 24 hours doesn't, to me, feel like some coincidence. And hacking is, until they can be certain what caused it, they cannot eliminate, in my mind, some sort of hack that occurred. It could be that a contractor working in both systems had a problem. Who knows? But they've got to figure out exactly what caused it and then they have to ask the bigger question as they go into authorization legislation for the FAA. What funding does the FAA need? It's continuously modernizing and improving its capabilities. I was a part of the whole air traffic control system modernization. That's a separate system from what failed in the last couple days. But the truth is, these systems require a great deal of money. The people who operate them require a great deal of training. On the air traffic control side, a huge amount of work has been done, and we owe a lot to the air traffic controllers who run this increasingly complex but increasingly sophisticated system that makes air transportation safer. But the NOTAM side was kind of the stepchild. It doesn't have, I don't believe, the security wrapped around it. It didn't get some of the funding it needed to modernize. The modernization gets spread out because the Congress and frankly the Office of Management and Budget in past administrations hasn't given it the money. So what we're discovering is that these systems require funding, support, training, and the lack of that can create enormous disruption. And it kind of goes back to the point I'm making. You can run around town, and some of my Republican friends have, and complain about the FAA and complain about the way they spend their money and hold back funds, but there are consequences to not doing those things. And this is a system upon which we rely, not just, as Al says, he and I don't fly around like we used to do, but guess what? Boxes arrive from Amazon and other shippers every week here at my house. I suspect at Al's too. So even if you're not personally flying, you're relying upon an air transportation system, to conduct your daily life, and these so-called glitches can hugely affect it. So I hope they get to the bottom of it. I wonder whether the reaction was perhaps an overreaction, but in honesty, until they knew what the nature of the problem was, I suppose they took the right action. I don't think anybody was, endangered in any way. And in the interest of safety, they hit the pause button until they could sort it out. But let's hope we don't have to repeat that very often, or people are going to really lose confidence in what is in the world the most complex, but the safest system for air traffic anywhere on the planet.
I don't want to end the program without talking a little bit about Joe Biden and the discovery of not one but two instances where top secret or classified information has been found in his possession or in his offices. Al, this is a gift to the Republicans, I suspect. How do you think it's going to play out?
I think it's a gift to the Republicans. I just saw something come across that I guess the second batch may have been in a box that was stored in Biden's garage in Wilmington. It's not a good thing. And it sort of undermines to I think probably a significant degree in the public mind what Trump has done with classified documents. I mean, I think I do think there's a difference in degree, but that's a hard case to make in a lot of ways. I mean, Trump obviously, like he does with everything, resisted efforts by the archives to get the documents back. Biden didn't, all of that. And I understand how it happens. My guess is, and Craig, you may, you worked probably in the inner workings of the White House more than I have, but my guess is that some of these things were in briefing books because I guess some of them were briefings on foreign countries, probably places he was traveling. They get dumped in a briefing book. And then when he leaves, they dump the briefing books into a box, and nobody really checks what's in it. Things like that, but it doesn't really matter. There is a hard fact that classified documents showed up at its think tank, and now at his garage in Wilmington. And the Republicans will make a lot of hay out of that, and use that to minimize what may be a more serious problem, unless we find out that Trump really did something with those documents that is dangerous to our national security, which is, in my view, not beyond the realm. But still, I think it's a very unfortunate circumstance for President Biden. But it also, going back to our first discussions about how hard it's going to be to get things done, this is not going to make it easier. And I think it's probably going to make it more likely that one of the predictions that Craig and I made last week or the week before, that Biden and probably not Trump would be candidates in 2024, is even more likely.
Craig, you have the last word.
So let's take the documents. I take it in two parts, and I have had in my government service and after zero tolerance when it comes to the handling of classified documents. If you appreciate and understand what goes on and goes into the development of this classified material by our intelligence community, it's a binary decision. You either protect it or you treat it lightly. And when you leave office, when you leave your office at night, let alone when you leave your office and retire from government, you turn the documents into the appropriate officials. You don't take them with you. You don't put them in your garage. You don't have them, in your house. And honestly, they can say, well, it was just a briefing on, this or that. You have no idea, whether there are going to be consequences associated with the leaking of documents. So not handling documents appropriately is wrong. There are penalties that are attached to it. That's appropriate. And it looks like former Vice President Biden, now President Biden, may have in fact crossed that line. May have done no damage by it, but crossed the line. The second part of the document story, though, is what happens afterwards. And that's where the Biden story and the Trump story diverge entirely. I honestly wish the Congress wouldn't spend a lot of time on this. No doubt the House will, and no doubt it'll be a tormenting kind of process. And I completely agree with Al. The President Biden is going to look down this path towards another campaign and wonder, why in the world would I go through this? And as long as he continues to say he's going to be a candidate, or indeed if he becomes a candidate, these House Republicans are going to be on, attacking. And I don't wish that upon anybody, including the incumbent president.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.